My name is Sam. I'm from Medina, Ohio, and I have 5 years in recovery. Today, I am a wife, a daughter, a sister, a friend, and an employee.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your very full life to join us. We really appreciate it. If you could start off by sharing a bit about your childhood.
Sure. So I grew up with divorced parents. They divorced when I was about 5 years old. My dad is a person in long-term recovery, and when my parents divorced, he actually had custody of me. So I lived with my dad growing up. My mom struggles with substance use disorder. So I still had visitations with my mom, but my dad's house was always safe, stable, good morals, good values, like just a really good, loving home. And I believe that's because my dad had recovery. My mom's house, on the other hand, was the opposite. So mom's house was often filled with drugs, alcohol, child abuse, domestic violence, sex workers, things like that. So it was a whole other experience from what I had at my dad's house. And so, I remember watching my sister fly down a flight of steps and my mother chasing my brother with a cutting board to hit him with it. And so fortunately that never happened to me. But what I witnessed at her house had a lasting impact on me and how I form relationships with other women, and how, I got into relationships with men. So I saw my mom, I saw my mom's boyfriend once throw her over the back of a couch. And, I said, I'll never do that. I'll never do that. And then I found myself in active addiction, in abusive relationships on many different occasions.
And those traumatic experiences, oftentimes do inform the way that we act and behave and what we think's okay as we grow older. So, could you talk a bit about when you first started using any substances?
Sure, yeah.
And what it did for you too.
Yeah, I was a late bloomer. So I listened to a lot of recovery stories, and I was like 15 years old before I picked up any alcohol or drugs. And the reason for that was because, I had a dad who had to go to 12-step meetings all the time. And I had a mom who was, struggles with alcoholism. And I had a sister who struggled with a crack cocaine addiction. So I looked at all these people in my family and I said, I never want to be like any of them, right? And so for a long time that kept me from, picking up any weed, picking up any alcohol, any kind of substances. And then when I was 15 years old, I was kind of an ugly duckling, right? So like middle school, I got picked on a lot. And then high school, I hit puberty, all my like little baby fat fell off. And all of a sudden boys paid attention to me. And so for me, that was really my first drug, right? Was attention from men. But I like bad boys. I always have, and so I'm hanging out with these kids who drink, who smoke weed, and I'm watching them, and I'm not doing it, but I got curious. And so I drank for the first time. And, I can't sit here and say that it was this spectacular thing, this spectacular moment, because I was very on edge about it. I was afraid to get caught. I was very into like monitoring how everybody else was behaving. But I knew at the next day, I was like, I want to do that again. Like I suffered no consequences, nothing bad happened. I didn't get in trouble, and I knew I wanted to do it again. So I continued, and this is a disease that's progressive. So I, slowly in high school just progressed into, okay, I just drink. Okay, but now I'm going to try smoking weed, right? And I remember smoking weed for the first time with my boyfriend, and I was like, why do my eyes feel so heavy? I didn't understand that was like the effect of it, because I never really had the education of like what drugs really are. Just don't do drugs, just the DARE program, and I knew when I smoked weed, I was like, oh, this is great, and really what I was doing was self-medicating for undiagnosed depression, anxiety, and ADHD.
As you continued, progressing through life, after high school, what did that substance use look like for you?
So after high school, I graduated, barely, but I graduated. I think they just kind of were like, let's get rid of her. But I graduated high school. I went to Youngstown State University, and in Youngstown, I met a guy, of course, because that's, part of my disease, right? Met a guy, and he did things besides weed and alcohol. So he did cocaine, and he did like prescription pills and stuff like that. And those were those lines in the sand, right? That I was like, I'm never gonna do that, because my sister's a crack addict, and if I do cocaine, eventually I'll do crack, right? But he did cocaine, and he didn't die, and he didn't act like he was addicted. So I got curious and I tried it. And as a person with ADHD, when I do speed and other substances like that, it's medication for me. It chills me out. And I fell in love with it. And I was like, I'm going to do this every single day before I go to class, because this is going to help me do my work. And yes, I did some of my work, right? But eventually I got into just major consumption of it, distribution of things too as well. And then, college life, I go to a bar, I'm 18 years old, they let me in, I can drink there, no problem. And so the drinking piece kicked up at 18 years old too. But it really didn't get out of hand for me until I was 21. Because I always looked really young. So when I went to, when I was 21, I could drink at all the bars, and of course bars, I'm doing cocaine, and then I'm up for days, so I'm doing Percocets and Xanax to come down. And so it just became this vicious cycle.
And how long did that last for?
So I used heavily for 8 years until I first got sober. So I was 23 years old when I first got sober. I did not last very long, thank God. Thank God for that. So I was 23 when I first got sober, and then that was in 2013. And from then until my current recovery date, I had some slips in between and relapses and stuff.
So could you talk about what happened at 23 that you decided, you were going to try and get sober?
Yeah. So I was a couple months out of a pretty rough breakup. A guy that I was just totally in love with, and my heart got broken, and I started using heroin maybe a month after we broke up. I used heroin very short, brief time, because I think I used heroin for 2 months, and then it took me down very fast. And I had a really good job. I was working like 50 hours a week at a really good manufacturing company in their office, and I was bartending, and I was doing some other things to make money, you know how we do.
Right.
And I was a really great worker, but I was really hard to get to work. And when I was there, I wasn't always great because I was sick, because I wasn't using. So I started using on the job. And eventually, they were just like, Sam, my boss had told me, Sam, if you come in late tomorrow, I'm going to have to let you go. And I said, okay. And I made it a point to set like 17 alarms, but I did heroin. And I slept through everything. And, he called me and he was like, Sam, I can't do this with you anymore. I'm so sorry, and it was devastating for me. It was my first like real true consequence of my using that really impacted me. And so I knew that the jig was up, and I knew that I had to do something different. And I just didn't think I could do it in Ohio. So I had I had $14 to my name. It was enough to get me a train ticket from Chicago to where my sister lived in Illinois. And I had a friend who was going to drive me to Chicago and drop me off at this train station. And it was this whole plan. And I had a moment sitting in the driveway of some ex-boyfriend's, driveway. And I was like, I better call my sister and let her know I'm coming to town, because I don't even know her address. Like, I was just going to show up in Bloomington, Illinois, in the middle of a cornfield, and just be like, hey, come pick me up from the train station, right? And then my plan was to tell her how bad life had gotten. But I had a moment to call her. And I called her, and she just very plainly said, Sam, what's really going on with you? And all of a sudden the truth came out, and I had been lying for 8 years and thinking I was hiding my use and everything else. And I was like, it was like I was watching myself tell her the truth. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're not supposed to tell her till you get there. And she called my dad. And the one person who could help me, I was like, you can tell anybody but him. you know? And she was like, I'm absolutely calling him. What's wrong with you? Like, so she snitched on me to my dad, and, you know, I ended up going back to my grandparents' house, and he just looked at me and he said, you know, what are you willing to do to stay sober, Sammie? And I, you know, I knew the right answer was anything, right? So that's what I said. And he took me to my first meeting, and that's where it all started.
Could you talk a little bit about being a mom and how, you know, you doing the best you can to be a mom, but how your relationship with your children were impacted?
Yeah, so I almost lost my kids. So when Kyle and I had split up, he took emergency custody because we were living at his mom's house, and he kicked me out of the house. So he took emergency custody because I obviously had nowhere to live and was living in a hotel. I managed to get some funds together and be able to get an apartment within like 2 weeks, which is, you know, crazy, but it was a different world we were then, you know, 5 years, 6 years ago or whatever. So I almost lost them. And, you know, what I hated for them was that through that period of time, life felt really inconsistent. And I remember experiencing that feeling as a kid of, you know, my mom moved around a whole lot. My dad moved quite a bit too as he was settling in as like a person in recovery and making his financial amends and stuff. And I remember feeling like I never had anything stable. And all I wanted for them was stability, you know. And fortunately today, you know, I can provide that for them. And that's how I make my amends to those kids. But like, you know, I just remember feeling so guilty because I wouldn't drink in front of them. I wouldn't use when they were with me. But I would have had I continued, right? But I just didn't. I just wanted them to be stable and feel safe and loved, you know?
Yeah.
So
what happened a little over 5 years ago that you decided enough is enough?
Yeah, it's a tough day. So July 18th, 2018, it was a beautiful, hot July. Actually, it wasn't even that hot out. It was just one of those beautiful sunny days with a good breeze. A couple like puffy clouds in the sky. I went to pick up the kids from their dad's house, who he lived with his mother. I went to pick them up from there, and we lived in the same town, like actually not far, so I actually walked there. And I walk in the house, and his sister and her boyfriend are coming down the stairs, and she's sobbing. And my first thought is, oh my gosh, you know, what's wrong with my kids? Something's wrong with the kids. And she was like, kids are safe. You need to go talk to my mom. So his mom comes around the corner, and she's sobbing. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? And she looks at me and she goes, Sam, Kyle overdosed. And I kind of just looked at her. I said, what do you mean he overdosed? Because he had overdosed in the past and lived, right? And she's just crying. And I just said, oh my God, is he dead? And she said, yes. And that feeling, right? That gut punch. And I fell to the ground. And I couldn't see straight. And I couldn't hear. And I just was screaming, what about my babies? What about my kids, right? Because a year and a half prior to him dying, Jacob, we stood at my sister's funeral. And he looked at me at her funeral. And he said, I promise I'm not going to leave you guys like that. Not like this, because at my sister's funeral, I watched her two kids who don't know her because of her disease. And they cried and mourn a mother they don't even know, right? Yeah. And he said, I promise I won't do this, right? Addiction's stronger than any promise anybody could ever make. And, you know, I had drank the night before. I had plans to use Percocets that night. And, you know, I pick up the phone, and the first person I called was my dad. And I said, Dad, Kyle's dead, right? And every time I had to say it, it was like another punch to the gut. Yeah. And he, you know, I said, you got to come get the kids. I said, I am a total wreck. I just can't. And he was like, no problem. Came and picked up the kids. Next phone call was my sister, the same sister who called my dad on me, right? And I said, Mandy, Kyle's dead. And she screams, you know, because it's like, we've had that phone call in our family more than any family should ever have to. You know, one time is too much, right? And I'm talking through her with it, and she goes, Sammie, you don't have a luxury to relapse anymore. And I was like, wow, you're right, I don't. And I made a decision that day, right? I said, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to use. I know I was planning to do it tonight, but I'm not going to do it. I'm not, because now my kids, I'm all they have. And so I made the choice, right? And then I just started picking up the pieces and got rid of that toxic relationship that I was in, and found a new sponsor and started working the steps and started doing it as thoroughly and honestly as I possibly could. And, you know, things slowly started to get better. And it took a long time because I was broken and I was traumatized and I was sad and I was grief-stricken and all of these other things, you know, and it started to get better.
What are some feelings that you have been able to experience in recovery that weren't there or you weren't able to experience when you were in active use?
Peace, right? Serenity. So, you know, I have a very overactive mind, right? It runs at high speed all the time, whether it's with anxiety or it's just like I'm squirreling out, right? You know, but I remember the first time I felt serenity, the first time I got sober. So I was pregnant with my son. I was about a month away from giving birth. And I was on my way to the meeting with my dad. And he's like, why are you so quiet? And I was like, I'm just chilling. And he was like, oh, you're feeling some serenity, aren't ya? And I was like, is that what that is? Because I feel all weird inside. You know, but today, like, I really feel serenity. I can love others and I can allow others to love me. So, like, that's a huge thing because I used to throw up these walls and, like, you only get so close to me. You can tell me you love me, but I don't believe you. Like, today I let them love me. And so, and I think that's really a crucial piece too, because, you know, part of this is like people had to love me until I could love myself because I am my biggest critic. So yeah, so those feelings, and then, you know, there's certain moments that I like think of, like when I first got sober, the first time I noticed, like, I hate fall, like I like summer, you know, even though I like Halloween stuff, right? I hate the fall because I'm like, everything's dying, you know, that was like my traditional thought on it. But like the first time I was driving to Columbus to go see my mom, and the trees were all these different colors. I like saw the colors of the trees for the first time, like in my life. And I was like, wow, you know? Or it's when I come home from work and my kids are like, Mommy, and they run up to me and they hug me, even though getting them out the door earlier that morning, I was like, get your stuff together, get out of this house, get to school. You know, they're like always forgiving and always just so happy to see me and love me. And I'm like, oh, that's unconditional love, right? And I love that.
Absolutely. It seems like you can really experience life today.
Yes, I feel it all, and sometimes that sucks.
Right? Yes,
it does, because
right.
I feel all my anger. You know, I don't take medication for any of my mental health. I'm just white knuckling through life sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I really could use some help. But I feel everything today, and I don't have to drink, and I don't have to use drugs, and I can just sit in it, even if it's uncomfortable, right? And like, I just do it and make it through, and I rely on that support. I rely on my husband and my family and stuff to talk through those things.
Could you share some words of hope or inspiration that really speak true to you when you're struggling?
So I can't recite it word for word, but I'm going to throw it out there for anybody who wants to like Google it later. It's called the Desiderata. It's by Max Ehrmann. It's like a poem. And it is my guideline for living. And it starts off like, go placidly amid the noise and haste. Remember what peace there may be in silence. And it's like, it feels very spiritual and like 12-step programmy, but it's not quite that. And there's a line in there that says, you are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and stars. And for me, that gives me so much hope because I belong here. Because how many times did I try to die, right? How many times should I be dead? I did enough drugs that would kill an old man, or a grown man, not an old man. Maybe an old, probably. You know, but there were nights where I intentionally used to die, and I didn't. And I know that I have a space here on this earth, right? And I have a purpose, and sometimes it doesn't feel very clear to me, but sometimes it's loud and clear. And, you know, you belong. And that's really like the most important thing for me to remember whenever I'm doubting myself, whenever I'm struggling with imposter syndrome, all of that stuff, right? Like, I belong, and I'm here on this path because I belong here. So if you have time, look up the Desiderata.
Yes.
It's beautiful. I have it plastered on my house. I love it. So, but then the most important thing is there is always hope. There is always hope. If your heart is beating, there is hope for you. And, you know, I've lost my sister Kristen and Kyle and some other family members as well. You know, and their story ended when they died, right? But their legacy can live on through me. And I can tell their story, and I can use them as an example and the impact their lives had on me, right? And so, you know, if your heart is beating, there is hope. Do not give up. Help is absolutely available. We want you to get well. Recovery is a treatable disease. It's absolutely treatable, and people shouldn't be dying from this. Not when there's, you know, not when there's a solution.
Thank you so much for taking time. This was just an incredible story, and you have this sense of peace, but also a real sense of living life that is just infectious, and that's really what recovery is all about. So being able to be part of the world and really being able to experience it it's spectacular. So thank you so much.
Yes, it's worth it. All of it's worth it.
Absolutely.
You know? So
for
thank
sure.
you.
Well, thank you.